Well, for me, the big indicator that it's fall and that the seasons are changing is it starts to get cold at night. It doesn't usually get super cold during the day here in Southern California until the dead of winter. We don't really have a proper experience of the seasons here. We do plant trees that aren't really native to here, and then so you get some of the stuff. We get some cherry blossoms in the springtime. You can see those in San Diego or in Huntington Beach or up in Pasadena. And then we plant a lot of oak trees and stuff like that, and then they still do. Their leaves turn crimson and other colors. I don't think quite as dramatically as the Midwest or the East Coast, but they do change, on some level. So I had an oak tree at my house growing up, and you see South Orange County and these planned communities, Mission Viejo and such. They'll plant on a street, lots of trees that specifically are designed to give you that nice fall foliage, those falling leaves, those interesting color, beautiful color leaves, the oranges and the yellows and the reds. Yeah. So, although technically you can get a little bit of an experience of the seasons because we pump water in and plant, trees that don't really belong here. The real indicator for me that the seasons are approaching is that the days get shorter. So in the summertime, 8:30, 8:45, it's still light out. But then, and about now, it starts to get dark around 6 o'clock, which really, it affects me. It affects me. I want to do less. I want to eat more. And I want to just kind of essentially hibernate a little bit. The shorter days, they do that to me. So this time of year, around Halloween, around the beginning of November, I feel a shift. Obviously it doesn't happen all at once. The day gets a minute or two shorter every day for 6 months, and it gets a minute or two longer every day for 6 months. But at least for me, the experience is kind of all at once. Maybe within the course of a week or so, I really feel the shift. So that's happening right now, today. I'm feeling that shift. More people commit suicide in the wintertime. People tend to suffer depression more in the wintertime. People report suicidal thoughts more often in the wintertime. Obviously, if people are killing themselves, they're thinking about it. For the Germanic hordes, the Northerners, they had the whole evergreen thing, that they would put wreaths of evergreen on their houses over their domiciles, because evergreen is a foliage that stays green through the winter when everything else loses all of its leaves and becomes totally barren. Evergreen, it lasts. Yeah, interesting, like even our trees in Southern California are weak. We had that wind on Monday, big ficus tree at the temple blew down. We had to get a chainsaw and, blew down, like the roots came out. It wasn't like a tornado or something. In the Midwest, you get all these tornadoes hitting. Everybody's got a basement. I don't know if you guys ever spent time in the Midwest, but tornadoes roll through and everybody goes down the basement and hangs out for 20 minutes or half an hour until the tornado rolls over, just in case it rips your house away. I guess the theory is if you're in the basement, somehow you're safe. And I think that's true. I don't think tornadoes are ripping people out of a funnel out of their basement. There's no earthquakes, so they have, the houses are made out of bricks, but they have tornadoes. So it was fairly minor. We had a bit of wind. It wasn't like hurricane strength or anything like that. Our tree blew over. Like one of the sturdy trees of the temple, I couldn't believe it, And I was thinking, even the trees in Southern California are weak. There's that, like a little YouTube video where there's a bunch of hipster type people hanging out in Southern California, making the interweb or whatever people do out here. And then they start freaking out and it rains, like a little drizzle, and people are melting and dying and poking their eyes out, and then it's over, and it's like they survived Hurricane Katrina or something like that. Things are mild here, but irrespective of that, in Chicago, when it's 45 degrees out during the day, people run outside with their shirts off and they're like, spring is here, yeah. Whereas here, when it's 45 in the dead of night, people are, calling 911 or something like that. It's like a big deal. If you have to wear a jacket, if you can't decide whether you want to wear a jacket or a t-shirt, and you have to choose to wear a jacket, that's like a big deal. So anyway, irrespective of all that, irregardless just got put into Oxford's dictionary. It's a bad day in the world. This is like last week. Irregardless made it in I'm not joking. Last week, irregardless made it into Oxford's dictionary. Just the dumbing down of the English language. Yeah. So, irrespective, of the reality that we don't really experience that much in terms of a change of seasons. Some of you are wearing shorts and t-shirts. At least for me, even though it's small, I feel a shift in my consciousness that takes place right about now. And I feel more pensive. I run a little darker, a little more negative, a bit more inclined towards hibernation, overeating, lethargy. And I like to read more. I like to dress warmer. And I just, in general, become a lot less active physically, not just in terms of, like, I don't work out as much, but less active physically in the sense of I want to just chill. and maintain and hibernate. It's not simply a physical lethargy, but it's more like a mental tendency to just even, just be, maybe more pensive in the sense of more melancholy or thoughtful in some abstract sense, but less like I want to sit down and crunch numbers and think things through. Does that make sense? So, I'm 48 now, so, maybe for 43 years I've noticed this. Maybe not. I mean, maybe I was older by the time I figured this one out. At least for 30 years or so, 35 years, I've noticed this every fall. And I'm assuming that what is personal for me is also fairly universal, and that most of you know what I'm talking about and experience something similar. Yeah? You? Yeah? How about you, Ann? Yeah? Same? Okay. So, I think that the realization that things wither and die, the realization that it's not all rainbows and unicorns, the realization that things tend to disintegrate over time, I think that can be a good thing. I think we can take lemons and make lemonade. I think we can take lemons and make lemonade. Prabhupada used to use the word disintegrate to mean a lack of wholeness, because wholeness is integration. You become an integrated person. There's no dissonance between your behavior and your values, or between competing values. You achieve integration in the sense of you become a whole person. And Prabhupada would speak about being disintegrated in the literal meaning of the term, to mean less integrated, less whole, because there's cognitive dissonance between competing values. You guys know what cognitive dissonance is? It's where you have two ideas, and the ideas are at odds with each other. And it creates a disturbance in your mind because you ascribe yourself to two paths or two ideas, and at some point you do the math and realize they don't add up. Like, I love animals, but I eat them. That's called the meat paradox, which has been studied, and on an academic level. This big phenomenon in the Western world, in Europe, and in the US, that's been studied systematically, that people are really not comfortable with the reality that they eat meat and that they also love animals. When you ask people to order, if you tell them, would you like to order some cow or some pig, they'll pick the vegetarian option. When you call it pork or beef, they're more likely to order it. When there's a picture of the animal, a live animal, they're less likely to order it. They don't like to do the math. It's there. There's a song, I wish I were an Oscar Mayer wiener. Oh, that's what I'd really like to be. Because if I were an Oscar Mayer wiener, then the whole world would be in love with me. That was an attempt to, Oscar Mayer wieners are hot dogs, which are almost like a product of rendering. They take the really unwanted parts of a pig. They also make them out of beef, and then they render them and process them, fill them with nitrates, and that becomes a hot dog. A lot of baseball stadiums now are doing vegan dogs. It's crazy. I mean, mind blown emoji. Like, if I was a kid growing up and I was like 16, I just became vegan. It's 1988, and you told me in 30 years, baseball parks all over America are going to be serving vegan hot dogs. I'm like, no way. There's no way that's happening. It's really far out. Anyway, I can't stand vegan hot dogs because I ate real hot dogs as a kid growing up, and the vegan hot dogs are indistinguishable from the real hot dog, at least as far as I know. And so they gross me out, and I cannot stomach them. They make me want to yak. I tried doing the fake meat thing. It just does not work for me. It tastes, they get too good at it. It tastes too much like meat, and so that like makes me want to vomit every time. And when I first went to the temple, they told me I should be vegetarian, and I told them there's no way I'm ever going to be vegetarian. I like the taste of meat too much. I said that at the age of 15 when I first went to the temple. And now, for 30 plus years, I even just the fake meat makes me want to yak. I start to like feel nauseous. I tried it so many times. It ruined so many meals. I just said forget it. Anyway, Oscar Mayer wieners. Also, there's the idea, and McDonald's made like a McDonald's world where there was the Hamburglar, and there was Grimace. Grimace was a purple monster. Was Grimace Sesame Street or McDonald's? Grimace, yeah, McDonald's. Snuffleupagus was Sesame Street. Similar animals, kind of shambling mounds. And then, and then Ronald McDonald, of course, was there. And there were some other figures that I can't remember who all. The Big Bird, no, that's Sesame Street. Anyway, they get all mixed up in my head because I grew up and I watched Sesame Street and I watched McDonald's commercials and bought Happy Meals and stuff like that. And it's all merged together, this happy world of McDonald's land. And so the hamburger would steal hamburgers because he was a hamburglar. See how clever that is? Because McDonald's hamburgers are so good, he would steal them. And you know how he would steal them? He would steal them from the hamburger tree. Hamburgers in McDonald's land grew on the hamburger tree. And then a hamburglar would pick these lovely hamburgers off of the hamburger tree. Do you remember this? Yeah. You remember this? How old are you, Howard? 25. All right. You make the cut. You're grown up. You're an adult. They did that euphemistically because if they actually explained to people where hamburgers came from, they would not want to eat them, and children would not be able to eat them. And so this cognitive dissonance and this meat paradox is there at every stage, and you know it's there at every stage because companies that sell meat to children have to come up with these really interesting myths about how the stuff is produced, because if they actually do the math and explain it to kids, they won't want to eat it anymore. So Prabhupada would use the word integrate, and he would contrast it to disintegration. Now when I think disintegrate, I think a ray gun from Star Trek or Star Wars that disintegrates people, like you shoot them with a laser and then they turn into a pile of ashes, or they just disappear altogether. They get disintegrated. My usage of the term disintegrate comes from watching science fiction. And so I thought Prabhupada's usage of disintegration is really clever. Sometimes you get this when you meet somebody who uses your language is not their language, and so they learn your language without what are called the plausibility structures, just things you don't question. And so they listen to the etymology of the words and they understand what the words actually mean, and they use them in what's usually an archaic way, not in a modern way. Like they would never use irregardless because they realize it's a double negative and it would mean with regard. Like one of my dear friends, really dear friend, is sannyasi. And he was one time giving a class, and he said, we have to surrender to Krishna without reservation. He read this in one of Prabhupada's purports. He said, yes, without reservation. Because I was just thinking about it. Just like when you go to stay somewhere, you make a reservation so that you're accommodated. But we should not make a reservation. We should just surrender without reservation. You follow? I thought it was really clever. And it's actually, it's accurate. It's what is meant. It also means without any caveat or something like that, without any exception, fully and wholly and completely. But without reservation, he likened it to his own experience. He used to be on Padayatra for many, many years. And so when you do Padayatra, you have an advanced party. You walk around India from village to village with bulls and a whole crew of people and deities. But you have an advanced party, and they usually have a motorcycle. And they zip ahead of you. And then they go to the village that you're going to be walking to, 5 or 10 miles. And they go ahead and they meet the people in the village that day, and they figure out where you're going to stay. At a school or on the side of the road, the campground. They figure out where you're going to get your water. They figure out, where to buy subsies and stuff like that so we can cook. And then we get there, and it's like we have an idea what's going on. Otherwise, we get there at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening time, and everything's shutting down, and we've got nothing arranged, and you're stuck. And being stuck in India without things being arranged, when the sun goes down, at least in rural India, is a disaster. So you got to know where the well is. You got to figure the whole thing out, where we're going to pass, where we're going to do everything. So if we roll in a little bit late, things are good to go. It's our advanced party. So he was on Padayatra. So he was like, yes, just like we send our advanced party and they make reservations for us. He goes, we should not be like that. We should just go and surrender to Krishna and let him take care of everything. And I thought that was really interesting. So it's crazy how I wove irregardless into there, didn't it? It's going to get better. Just you wait. In the same way that when we look at words and the way people use words, we can sometimes learn something new about the terms. We can also see how people look at the world, and we can learn something new about the world. In general, most religions have a relatively negative view of this world. They poo-poo on sex, and they always talk about dying and the afterlife and heaven and hell and soteriological and eschatological concerns, end-of-life liberation type concerns, eschatology, soteriology, these kind of things they get into. And because they're focused on that world, then they focus a whole heck of a lot less on this world. Now, good religions also do the this world thing, and then you end up like a Catholic mixer or something like that in the basement of the church, and you're like, this is just a really bad block party, and without any alcohol. And so, they go on both sides, or sometimes they get too this worldly, too immanent, they get too that worldly, too transcendent. But in most religions, including every religion you'd have experience of, you've got this disdain, disregard for, wariness towards this world and the things of this world. Sometimes it gets really big and you get these hellfire and brimstone lectures. You know what those are? Hellfire and brimstone lectures. It's a phenomenon in Christianity, and it's also there in Islam, where people will scream at you how if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to hell. You're going to burn in an ocean of fire. In an ocean of fire. That's hellfire and brimstone. Can I get no? Can I get a C? What's that spell? Ocean. That's hellfire and brimstone. It's been around for a long time. So, I probably want to spell fire. Spelling ocean wouldn't be the right go. Probably want to spell fire. So that's a hellfire and brimstone lecture. You're trying to make people afraid, fear God. You talk about how horrible this world is. And of course, things in this world are horrible. Usually women, because religions are patriarchal. Society is patriarchal. The world is patriarchal. I'm sorry. That's just the nature of things. We may be able to make the world more egalitarian, but the world's patriarchal because women are the weaker sex. And if you look at social mammals, and you look at primates in particular, the social mammals that we have the most in common with, they don't treat their women very well. They smack them around and rape them, and they got to figure out who the alpha is so they don't get smacked around and raped too much. And the nature of the world is somewhat patriarchal, even in the animal kingdom. There are exceptions. Usually, we're like, what about that spider that mates and then kills and eats its mate? Yeah, okay, fine. You found an arachnid that does that, like 1 out of 1,000,000 species. Like, collect your data, get like 10 different species together, and none of them are primates, none of them are social mammals. There is a group of people in Timbuktu. Timbuktu is in North Africa, by the way, but anyways, Timbuktu is a stand-in for any really exotic, out-of-the-way place. And so Timbuktu, I can't remember whether it's Nepal or it might just be like over the border into Tibet or over the border into China. But there's a village where the women are polyamorous and the men are monogamous. So the men stay at home and make a home, and the women have like a few dudes and they go from home to home, and like there is, I mean, you know, whatever, there's 100 people in the village, but it exists. It exists. It's just there's real small numbers of that. Because of that, because of the natural patriarchal nature of the world, then when you start talking religion, you start talking religion from the point of view of men, and then things of this world are temptations and they're evil, and then women become evil and women become temptresses, and that's where that all comes from. Do you guys follow that? And so, the idea that we have to figure out civil rights, figure out how to be egalitarian, figure out how to even the playing field, it makes perfect sense because we're moving from a more animalistic society to a more human society. When you look at the animal world, it's cruel, and it definitely does not favor women. Interesting, right? Never thought about it like that, did you? Huh?
I have a bit because of your lectures.
Okay. That means you never thought about it before. If it's just you heard me lecture on these topics previously, just go ahead and go with it and give me credit. And so, irregardless, right? Disintegration without reservation. Geez, it's cool to look at a new way of looking at words. Oh wow, we can also look at our values and our culture through a different lens, and it can be illuminating. Case in point, the patriarchal nature, not of human society, of nature. You follow? And also, to notice that we live in this world, and then we get old and die, and we have to leave everything behind. That reality, if you allow it to, it will weigh on you. It'll make you think, what am I doing? Why am I spending so much energy building myself a future at a train station when the train's going to leave the station in just a few minutes. Like the train, train stops at the train station. Like, if you take a train in India, sometimes it's 2 days. So, I take bath a couple times a day because I'm a Hare Krishna people. And so, it's a trip, dude. Taking a bath on a train? An Indian train? You know what you do? Damn right you don't know what you do. You go in the bathroom and you stand on the blocks over the hole, which is where you pass stool into. And then you pour lotus of water over yourself while you crouch down. You take a bath in the toilet, standing on the toilet blocks. You follow? You can do it, but it's rough, dude. It's rough and tumble. It's not good times. Like this because you don't want to touch anything because things are dirty as anything. You know what I mean? So you're like this. You're trying to drip the water on yourself so it doesn't splash on the ground and just ruin your whole scene. As it splashes on the ground, it comes back on you, and now you're wrecked. So you gotta it's a scene. It's a thing. You're crouched down, pouring little tiny drips of water on yourself. You follow? Not a good time. Can't put anything down. You hold it all. Yeah. So I got over that real quick. I did that a few times. I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. So then we rock a new system. We get in the train station. We rip out the train station, find the pump, start pumping water, strip down, bathe at the train station, because that's nothing. It's on the ground, you know what I mean? You pour a few lotus of water on the ground, a few buckets of water on the ground. Now the ground's all of a sudden clean. You take a nice bath, do your laundry real quick, throw everything back in your bucket, you get dressed without touching your cloth to the ground as you get dressed, and you run back on the train. Clean, T-lock, fresh clothes, all yesterday's laundry washed in your bucket, sitting, so when you get to where you're going, you just hang it up and you're good to go. Crazy, right? That's a science and an art form. Sometimes we even cook at the train station. Because it's outdoors, so you just run out kind of off to the side a little bit, step a little cooker, whip up some chapatis or something like that. If the train was there for half an hour, they get broken down. Sometimes they say it's going to take us an hour or two to fix it, which means 4 or 5 hours. And so you just get your scene together, lay out your bedroll there, and just lay down, go sleep in the train station, and when it's ready to go, you go. So I learned how to live at a train stations as we travel. But I never tried to build a house at the train station. Because the train's going to leave, and you got to be ready to wrap everything up in 2 minutes, jump back on the train. So whatever you're doing, it can't take you more than 2 minutes to wrap it up. You follow? Because you got to get back on the train. This material world is like that. Everything is taken away. And if you deeply contemplate that, you become calloused and despondent and suicidal and nihilistic and depressed and all that stuff. It is the natural result of deeply thinking about the nature of the world and our time in this world. However, it does not have to make you nihilistic. If you start to notice that consciousness does not appear to be material, that there's a source of consciousness, that there may be a God, that there is a God, that God loves you, that this world does not get in the way of that relationship, that the callousness or negativity that you feel towards getting too involved in this world can actually inspire you to get excited about spiritual life. You can get excited about spiritual life. Same way you get excited with a new business venture or a new friend or a romantic partner or a raise or some new opportunity to travel or do something amazing, you can get excited about spiritual life. And then, as the fall falls, I just realized fall means because the leaves fall in the fall time. I'm 48, I never thought of that till just now. As the leaves fall in autumn, and the season changes, and the world changes, and becomes less sensually attractive, we can use that. And we can turn inwards. Instead of becoming lethargic, there's an endless summer in Krishna consciousness. There's an endless summer in spiritual life. There's an endless summer in your japa. There's an endless summer in our sacred text. There's an endless summer in kirtan. And nothing can take it away. You can get old and you can be like a child, falling in love for the first time. And so in the same way that we look at words and how other people understand words, and it can illuminate those words for us in a way that it never was before, like the word fall. How many of you thought this fall was because the leaves fall from the trees? Like half of you, yeah. I never did. And then, in the same way you can learn something by looking at words differently, you can also look at concepts. And you can take something depressing, the patriarchal nature of this world. You can take something depressing, the cruel hand of time. You can take something depressing, the fact that everything disintegrates. You can take something depression that, we invest so much in things which will not long endure. And as you turn with the seasons towards becoming less materially motivated, you can become spiritually inspired. The Vikings were expert sailors. They were expert sailors. They were expert shipbuilders. And they weren't afraid of storms, because they knew how to ride the waves. And so the ocean, which was so fearful and dangerous for most people, wasn't so much for them, because they learned how to move with those waves and move in the ocean and navigate it and use it to their advantage. Gajendra was a great elephant. He fought a crocodile once. And he was beating the crocodile. But then the crocodile managed to drag him into the water. Now, in real life, crocodiles don't beat elephants. You know what animals beat elephants? You know who wins a fight with an elephant? Nobody. Elephants beat everybody. Their tusks are like 6 feet long. It's like two massive 6-foot spears. Like rhinoceroses, They're like 3 feet or something like that. It's nothing. Elephants weigh like 15 to 20,000 pounds. Hippos like 5 to 8,000 pounds. Elephants just like throw them around. They can pick up 800 pounds with their trunk. Their trunk has an 800 pound, their trunk, it's like not even like a strong part of their body. You know? Pick up like an 800 pound dumbbell and like chuck it, and hit somebody with it. It's crazy. Anyway, in this story, Gajendra got dragged into the deep water, and the elephant was weaker in the water because it's a land animal, and the crocodile was stronger in the water because it's more of an amphibious creature. So the crocodile was able to win a battle of attrition because it took place on his home turf. But the Vikings were unusual. And there must be a bunch of other, I think the Hawaiians were similar. There's other cultures like that, although they never built these great long boats that the Vikings did. They were like building little canoes and stuff like that. Am I wrong? Okay. And so I've never seen like long boats built by Hawaiians. But yeah, the Vikings were unusual because they were a seafaring people, but they're obviously land animals. They're land people. They're people, so they're humans, so they're made to live on land. But they learned how to use the ocean. And so the ocean became a place they would take people and they would win. Their naval battles, they would win. They would suck their foes into like naval battles and like getting on boats, and they would like to like get into it in the water because they fared better than everybody else because they were more expert. Habib, my favorite fighter who just retired, he said about his last opponent that he defeated like so easily it was ridiculous. The guy was like one of the best fighters in the world. But they said, well, how are you going to do in the fight? He goes, I'm going to drag him into the deepest water, and then I will drown him. We need to become comfortable in this material world, even though it's not our home, and we need to learn how to use it, and we can use the change of the seasons to inspire us in our spiritual life. I chant better japa in the wintertime. I read more in the wintertime. I become a little less sensual during the wintertime. You can take everything that life throws at you. Viktor Frankl said, if there is truly any meaning in life, then that means there must also be meaning in suffering, because suffering is a basic part of life. So if you believe there's purpose in life, or there's a telos, there's a dharma, then you have to believe that that's also true of suffering. And so I think it's interesting that as the seasons change, as things become less fun materially, as things become less sensually viable, we also have this lovely, sweet, romantic, beautiful month of Kartik. And we get to fall in love with Krishna and meditate on Krishna and explore that relationship in more detail. And we'll do that in a minute, but I just want to point out that in fall, things slow down and I slow down. And I become more fundamentally depressed. And less materially ambitious. And I want to look at words and how we can have new light shined on words. I want to look at concepts and how they can also shine new light on our understanding of things. And I want to look at the idea that examining the nature of the world and seeing its temporary nature, you can make it work for yourself. Just like we made the train stations work for ourselves. Just like the Vikings made the ocean work for themselves. We can expertly and almost miraculously figure out a way to take the nihilism which ensues from the darkness of winter, and we can harness that, and we can move with that, and we can find inspiration in that, and to dive into our japa, into our spiritual life, into our spiritual commitments. If we do so, we'll find that Krishna is as fresh and sun-like and summer-like and expansive and exciting as he ever was. And then the seasons will turn, and winter won't knock us for a loop. It'll just make us go to a deeper place. And many winters make us old. And we'll just go to a deeper place, and we'll contend with death, which is the ultimate winter. We talk about the autumn of your life. You know, your golden years, the autumn of your life. We'll be able to use the autumn of life on a macro scale, as well as every autumn in between. And we're able to figure out a way to make it work for us. Make the darkness work for us. Make the quietude work for us. Make the lack of inspiration for material things work for us. And we can be really active in thinking about serving Krishna, connecting with our values. And spiritual life really does take you to a place beyond time. To a place that defies the rules of the material world. That's impervious to time. Far from being impervious, time helps you. Gives you perspective. Takes away your passion. Helps you. And so the same way that they twisted the death of animals to deal with the cognitive dissonance for children, and they spun it. We can also, in a positive way, we can spin the sadness and the pensiveness and the lethargy we feel, and we can turn it into something really powerful and inspirational. The difference, of course, is that Ronald McDonald's myth, the myth of McDonald Land, was based on falsity and duplicity. Our myth, our ability to ride the waves, to ride the storm, is based on truth. That you are a soul, that you have a body, that this world doesn't long endure, but there's a deeper reality waiting for you, just behind the curtain, if you're willing to pull it back and take an honest look. Okay. So while things quiet down, we get to think about Damodar, Krishna, Damodar. Dhamma means bound. And Udara is where you get the word. Udara is where you get the word udder from in English. It means abdomen. Dhamma Udara. Damodar. Krishna's Damodar is bound around his belly. And so we celebrate this miracle that occurred. Krishna descended into this world. He played like a child. His playing like a child did not diminish his godhood, but it allowed his devotees to disport themselves on equal terms with him and care for him intimately. And so Krishna's childhood is predicated on an illusion. The origin of all becomes someone's child. That's an illusion. But that illusion is built on a foundation of truth, which is that God above all things is loving. And because Krishna above all things is loving, therefore he facilitates and immerses himself in loving relationships. And because rulers make bad lovers, therefore Krishna diminishes his godhood so he can hang out with his friends and get really close to people. And so Krishna was playing as a child, and his mother looked in his mouth one day, because Balaram said Krishna's eating dirt, so his mother looked in his mouth. And she looked in his mouth, and she saw the whole universe in his mouth. And she saw herself in the universe looking into his mouth and seeing the universe like a kaleidoscope. And she thought she had too much sun on her head. She's like, oh. And she forgot about it. Went back to loving Krishna as a child. That pastime takes place just before this Leela to teach us that although Krishna may be acting like a child and may even think he's a child, that don't forget that his Aishwaryattva, his godhood, his divinity, his Bhagavatva, his divinity, is always there and always present. So Krishna's mother was cooking for Krishna, and she was churning butter, and she was suckling her child. Krishna was drinking the breast milk of his mother. It's just like inconceivable. And then she put him down and abandoned him to go do some service. And he got angry. And so he broke some yogurt pots, stole some dairy products, and made a big mess. And so his mother went out and abused him. She tied him up. When I was a kid growing up in the 70s, when we misbehaved, this happened at least half a dozen times. Our babysitters would literally tie us up with rope. And my parents would come home, and we would be tied up. Like literally tied up. Like they would tie our legs together and tie our hands together. And we would sit there tied up because we were too much of a nonsense. So they actually got rope and tied us up. Literally. And my parents would come home, they'd be like, oh, clever. And like, and maybe they'd smack us around for like, being nonsense with the babysitters. But the babysitters were like applauded. And these were, our neighborhood friends. These were the elder children of our neighborhood who were hired as babysitters to take care of us when my parents went out to dinner, and they would tie us up. I even remember being thrown in the closet, tied up and put in the closet. Anyway, that was the 70s, This was thousands of years ago, but Yashoda, naughty Krishna, she tied him up. He was tracking mud everywhere, tracking yogurt everywhere, making a big mess and making a big fuss. So she tied Krishna up, but she couldn't tie him up because his belly is the abode of the universe. So no matter how much she tried to tie him up, she couldn't wrap that rope around him and tie it up. It was always just a little bit too short. 2 fingers too short. She went and asked all the other gopis in the neighborhood, all the cowherd women, give me whatever rope you got laying around the house. Like big, long rope. Every single stitch of rope in the whole town of Vrindavan, it was still 2 inches too short. And by this time, Yashoda was panting. Her hair had become disheveled. Her flowers had fallen from her hair, and she was sweating profusely because she wanted to protect Krishna from himself. Teach him a good lesson so he'd be a good boy. She loved him that much. She loved him like her own child. And Krishna, seeing the sincerity of his devotee, then he allowed himself to be bound. And so those 2 fingers too short are our sincerity and Krishna's grace. And Yashoda was so sincere and Krishna was so gracious that he agreed to be bound. and the unbindable Supreme Lord, whom all the universes are contained within his mouth, was bound. The unbindable, unknowable, unthinkable, undecipherable, unapproachable deity became known and bound and loved and approached and embraced by love. Because Krishna is above all things a lover, and the entirety of the Leela is predicated on that truth, which then allows Krishna to let go of things like his making us bow down and pray and feel inferior in so many things, which are unnecessary details that will obfuscate love, because everything is brought under the umbrella and the aegis, the rule of this principle of love. Therefore, Krishna is bound by love, as exemplified with this Leela. And then, so now Krishna, universe is in his mouth, that's the last chapter. Krishna's bound, I just gave that, that's this chapter, chapter 9, 10th canto. And then the next chapter, Krishna's bound and he's crawling. And as he's crawling, he's bound to this big wooden grinding mortar, where all the grains of the house, hundreds and hundreds of pounds. Like a large mortar and pestle that you would, not a little hand mortar and pestle, but like a big one that you would grind, the wheat of your farm on. He started dragging that with him, with the rope. Of course, the rope should have snapped, but somehow that spiritual rope didn't snap. And so Krishna's dragging this ulukava, this grinding mortar, and he drags it between two trees, and he pulls it through the trees. The trees break, just like our tree broke. And the trees break, and out pops a couple of devatas, out pops a couple of celestial beings, and they reveal we were cursed, we were offensive to a Vaishnava. And we were cursed to stand as trees for thousands of years. How are we doing? Is it 2 minutes? We were cursed to stand as trees for thousands of years. But that sage who cursed us also blessed us that we would be liberated by you. And so now Krishna comes through and he liberates them. So Krishna, the universe is in his mouth. He's bound, 2 inches too short, sincerity and grace, synergistic understanding of spirituality. He agrees to become bound. The unknowable becomes known, unapproachable becomes embraced, unconquerable becomes conquered by love, because Krishna is above all things a lover. And then in that bound state, while Krishna is bound, what's he doing? He liberates us. And by loving Krishna and binding Krishna within our hearts with love, we become liberated. And that's the nuts and bolts in a very, very brief way of the Damodar Leela. And we can take our lethargy towards materialism and we can use it as inspiration to dive into this conception of divinity. We can meditate on this while we chant. We can pray like this. We can think like this. We can sing the Damodar Ashtakam every day. And we can, in this way, turn that frown upside down and jujitsu our relationship with this world and learn to ride the waves of this world expertly so that everything brings us closer to Krishna. Okay. Thank you, IGTV.